So we'll start things off by grabbing the bumper and doing some assembly work there. We're going to get pod lights installed. We'll install these outer wing brackets as well as the trim bezels, and then start getting this thing bolted onto the truck. So with the main bumper shell, we've grabbed also the outer wings, which are going to mount right out here. You've got two corresponding holes, which you'll simply start out by lining those up, and then you've got 1/2-inch hex head bolts with washers here, as well as serrated flange nuts. So get these installed in both hole locations. Once you do have both bolts in, it's really just critical from here to kind of pay attention to the outside gap or the seam where the two sections meet. This is the point where you want to make those as neat and tidy, as seamless as possible. So take your time there, and then you can come in here and tighten these up. You will have access to this later on if you do need to make any minor adjustments to it for any reason, for fitment along here, or just to adjust that once again if you notice something that you don't like later on. You'll receive 2 of these textured gray trim plates. These are going to go down here along the bottom, 1 per side, and they're going to install using black 1/4-20 button head bolts with serrated flange nuts on the inside. So we can just line those up and drop a couple bolts in to kind of hang it temporarily while we reach in and install those nuts. Once you have all of those started or tight by hand, you can grab a 5/32 hex to finish tightening them up. You probably already noticed the hole cut out here as well as the ones in these outside corners. Those are for the backup or parking proximity sensors if your Jeep is equipped with those. If not, we do provide you these hole plugs, which typically when installing, we recommend a little bit of RTV on these just to be absolutely sure that they're not going to go anywhere over time. So put a little bit of that on and then carefully pop these in. And of course you can clean up any excess as necessary. As far as the actual sensors in that harness, Daryl will go through that on our JL. Now, just to prevent any possible confusion, you do receive 2 different sizes of caps. The larger caps are for the spindle sleeves out here on the end. If you choose not to install a carrier or you're not going to run one at this time, you can do the same thing with these. Essentially, to plug that spindle hole location, you'll want to seal these ones up nice and tight all the way around using some RTV to make sure there's no water, dust, dirt, debris, anything that's going to get in there over time and cause any rust or corrosion, and that way you can always add a spindle and therefore a carrier later on. And then this is a good time to mention these 2 sets of holes as well. These are for bolting on the latch catches for the adventure carriers. If you're going to be running those, you can bolt those on now, and you'll probably see the most in-depth look at those during our adventure carrier install video, so I'll refer you to that to go any further there. So at that point, the bumper itself is pretty much prepped for install. We'll now grab the hitch, which is going to be the first thing that we bolt up here on the truck. So you want this slanted mounting face toward the rear, and then you're basically just going to slide this up on each frame rail and be lining up those mounting holes. If you have it, you can use a jack during this step, but you can see here, due to this multi-piece design, it can be done pretty easily without. And then we'll again start one of those bolts per side to kind of hang this on here. Once you've got all 4 of those bolts in place, you'll then find the nylock nuts that correspond with those, as well as washers for each one, and get those installed. We're just going to thread these all the way in by hand for now. With it hanging here on the frame, we can now grab the bumper and get it bolted onto these mounts. So for the 4 holes that you see here, we're going to be using 1/2-inch hex head bolts with washers and flange nuts. These can run this direction, which is generally the easiest, but up in this top one, you're probably going to want to run this from back to front, and then you'll slide the nut up in here and get it lined up with that slot. And then over toward the center on the hitch receiver side of things, you're going to have a 3/8 stainless button head that will run through the bumper and through this receiver and get a flange nut on the inside as well. So we've secured this up here on our trans jack. You could do this as well with the help of a friend or even a floor jack in the driveway, but you just got to get this carefully up here and make sure you're watching all of your gaps along both the sides of the bed, these outside wings, and the tailgate and everything in here. So take your time with this step in getting things lined up. Just for some quick context here underneath the truck, we now have it in place with the hitch and the bumper, so you can see what that's going to look like, and then you can work towards getting the 4 bolts installed up here as well as up in that slot. And then as with all of the hardware, we're going to leave all of this a little bit loose until we have everything started. Now we can install these outer wing braces. These are side specific, so pay attention here. Basically, you're just going to look at the back edge and make sure it's parallel to this front edge up here on the bumper or hitch section once this is installed, so they both should angle the same direction. You're then going to have to get this up in front of this flange and slide it up on top of both, so it winds up between the frame and the hitch receiver here and on top of the bumper out here. From there, you want to get it lined up and you can start installing hardware. So you'll have 2 of these M10 hex head bolts with washers that'll go up here on the side, one of which is kind of hidden up behind the bracket right now. Then down here on the bottom, there's going to be some variation depending on the specific option package of your Gladiator. So if you are equipped with the max tow package, you're already going to have an M14 bolt and rib nut that goes in here. You're going to want to reuse those. In our case, we had to source something different from our local store so that we could get this one installed today. So you are not going to receive the hardware you see right here as far as this bolt and washer combination, and you're going to reuse factory once again if you have M14 nuts in the frame. And then if yours has the M12 nuts in the frame, slightly smaller, we do provide a flanged bolt replacement for that. You can then reuse the washer that we do provide as well, so you'll stack both of those so that you get good coverage over the hole here and then thread those in. Then out at the wing, you can install the 5/16 button heads in the 3 holes here. The bumper may need to be moved front to rear, so hopefully you still have all your hardware loose on the frame, and that'll help you get these lined up. Now, just before you tighten things up, take one last look, kind of step back, make sure you're happy with the fitment all the way around. So you're looking at body gaps between the bumper and the body and the bed and everything back here. Pay attention to your fenders or flares, whatever you're running up there in the front edge of the bumper. Make sure that everything looks nice and even. The safe bet is just to pull this all the way back. That's going to give you the most clearance. But again, that's personal preference. It's up to you. You can sneak it in a little bit as long as you have adequate clearance all the way around, and then work on tightening up all that lower hardware. Now with this hardware, we do recommend grabbing your torque wrench and torquing everything that goes up into the factory frame. So you're going to torque these to 120 foot-pounds, these to 120 foot-pounds, and then the stuff up here on the brace to 35, and then your outer hardware here, you'll just snug these up, as well as the same on your 1/2-inch hardware back in here. Now this is the point where if you haven't done so already, you would install those plugs or your carriers out on the corners of the bumper. So I'll once again refer you to our adventure carrier install video for the most in-depth look at how to get the carriers bolted on here, as well as the camera relocation video if you're going to be routing the camera from the tailgate out to the carrier, like we are going to have it on this during the final installation of this bumper. And then we'll kind of jump back to Daryl and he'll show you how to install the license plate flip and wire in your license plate light here if you're just going to be leaving it bare as far as carriers with the plate in the center.
Now we're going to install the license plate bracket. There's going to be a hinge here. It's going to have a thinner section right there and kind of a thicker section. You can see it right there. There's a screw here to adjust the tension on the thicker section of the hinge itself. It's like a friction adjustment. You want that side to go into the bumper. So the friction adjustment side goes into the bumper. So we'll do that first. So button head bolt through the top. And then you're going to have to give it the old reach around up in here and get this flange nut on. I'm using the 5/16 hardware here. So the larger of the button head hardware. And then just kind of line up that flange nut from underneath. Now you're going to take the other 5/16 button heads and this license plate bracket here. This little bend faces out. And go ahead and set that on top of the hinge. Go ahead and pull this down to the bottom of its adjustment and then tighten it with a 3/16 hex, T-handle, socket, whatever. Just like that. And then we're going to give you some 1/4-inch button heads and flange nuts to attach your license plate to this frame. For the license plate light, we're going to give you this little LED one here. It sticks on with this 3M tape. The backing is kind of a pain to get off. I use a razor blade or an X-Acto knife, and I just kind of pierce it somewhere in the center of the backing and then just pry up from the center. And usually that works pretty well, just to take the backing off and not take the adhesive off as well. So once you get that backing off, you can go ahead and just stick it on this bend here on the license plate bracket itself. And once that's stuck on, we'll handle the wiring. Okay, so I've already plugged in our license plate light factory wiring harness here. Now we're going to need to cut off a bunch of excess and cut off this connector here. So I think it's long enough to use. Yeah, we'll cut off this. This is the original driver's side connector. We're going to trim that off, and then we are going to just tape off those connections. And then I'm going to give myself just a little extra here. So we'll come maybe 1, 2, what is that? Maybe 10 inches from that cut. And we'll trim that there as well. So then we don't need these little clips anymore, body clips anymore. So we'll go ahead and cut off these little connectors that went into the frame and the factory bumper because we don't need those so much anymore. Just clean the wiring up a lot. Okay. And then we're going to unwrap some of this factory tape here. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull this through the top of the bumper just to make sure that we've got enough material here for what I'm doing. And you don't have to cut this this driver side connector off. Technically you could just tape over the connector itself, but we're not going to use it anymore, and I like to just waterproof it if I can. So you can get some of this heat shrink tubing that has a sealant inside of it, so once it shrinks down it actually seals as well. And then go ahead and put that over the ends of the wires for the connector that you cut off and leave yourself a little extra hanging over. And then you can shrink this and then once it gets hot enough to melt the glue, you can use some pliers or your fingers if you don't feel anything anymore and just press it together and press that sealant together. Pliers make this a little less hurty. So go ahead and do that on that connector. And then on the wires that we actually need, what we're going to do is we're going to strip those wires. There's a black and a white blue stripe on here, like that. We'll twist these up like that. We will cut, we don't need all of this on this light, so we'll just cut maybe, what is that, 10 inches, 12 inches of that light wire, and we'll separate these, and we'll strip these. Be careful, these wires are very fine. We'll strip those wires. So I'm going to use a expandable wire loom on here, but if you have just the split loom, you won't have to do this step ahead of time. But I'm going to grab some of this expandable loom here. So in the kit, we're going to provide you the license plate light and these heat shrink connectors. The wiring loom and tape and whatever else you want to use is up to you, kind of whatever you feels necessary. We're going to go ahead and crimp these butt connectors onto the factory wiring. And then onto the license plate LED. So we're going to go black to black and red to white blue stripe. Now these are just the colors that are on our Gladiator. Who knows between models and years if Jeep's going to change the colors. So this is just a guide on what our Gladiator is using for colors, but you may want to verify yours with a voltmeter or a test lamp or whatever just to make sure you've got the right wires. But on ours, black goes to black and red goes to white stripe or white blue stripe. Now if you wanted to put your license plate in your spare tire, if you're going to run a carrier with a spare tire on it, you could just extend these wires longer. Once you're down to here, you can kind of put this license plate light wherever you like. So once you have those crimped, you're going to grab a lighter or a hairdryer or a heat gun, and you're going to go ahead and shrink these crimp connectors. On the smaller wire, you may have to pinch it closed to get the sealing stuff to seal totally on the wire. You'll probably want to use pliers for this, but it's kind of hot. All right, so once we have that taken care of, I'm going to use, like I said, expanding loom on here, so I'm going to run my loom down. But if you have split loom or tape or whatever, you'd want to deal with that now. And then you can go ahead and just route these wires however makes the most sense for you and zip tie it on the back of the bumper. So you want to give yourself a little bit of a pigtail here, obviously for the license plate to hinge up and down. That's pretty good. And then you can start to zip it behind this bolt if you want to tie your loom up, and then behind the bumper as well.
So hopefully we didn't jump around too much on you there. You should now be armed with all the information you need to get this newer version of the bumper installed, along with the info provided in those corresponding accessory videos. And as always, be sure to check out those videos and check out the product page where you purchase this bumper for the most up-to-date photos of it like this, as well as with carriers installed to see what you're gonna get. If you have any questions at all about this install or really anything we offer here at JCR Off-Road, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always email us at info@jcroffroad.com or call us at 269-353-1184.